Yeah, Rishi, go ahead.
Yes, sir. First, we discussed about why we give English such importance in India,
Hmm.
and after that, you told us about subtractive bilingualism.
Okay.
That how we forget our own language, how we learn English at the cost of our mother tongue.
Right.
And then we discussed various aspects of this phenomena, whether it is colonialism and yeah, different aspects like that.
Right. Correct. So, what did we discuss about subtractive bilingualism? Anyone else remember something?
So I guess, sir, you tried to explain us with our own examples of how we have adopted English so well, but
Hmm.
somewhere down the line we have been neglecting our own languages, be it regional languages or our own mother tongue. And but on the other hand, we have this additive bilingualism, wherein with the help of English, which has now become our like our major language, we are learning. We are trying to learn different languages. So that part of our learning is additive bilingualism. Whereas
Right.
the when we learn English is our subtractive bilingualism, because somewhere we left our languages behind, which we were supposed to read. And then we discussed how and why it happened, and yeah, something along the lines of that.
Right. As you and Rushin have said, there is a rush, mad craze for English in India, right? And if you look at Japan or Germany or Italy or China or any other country, language which is spoken widely, right, at home is the language of literature in which people study literature, right? Germans study German literature in German, while Indians have to study Indian literature in English. It sounds weird, right? And that is our condition. And this condition is a kind of byproduct of colonialism. But then British left in 1947, which is almost 73 years have passed after Britishers have left. And even then, we are continuing with the same model of subtractive bilingualism, where acquisition of English usually results in depletion of your other language competencies, right? It deprives you. You slowly, apart from Hindi and English, you can't speak the third language, which was once your mother language, right? And mother tongue is a technical term. We use it for the first language that we use at home. But mother tongue is when parents are of different linguistic backgrounds. So if there is Tamil father and Kannadiga mother, then the mother tongue would be Kannada, right? So mother tongue is a term used in a situation where parents have different linguistic background. Otherwise, we use the term first language, our language that we speak at home most of the time in our life. That's first language, right? So very often that becomes our identity, that we are Gujaratis or we are Keralites or we are Banglas or we are Punjabis or what, very often. And because of our acquisition of English and even Hindi, we have started depleting our first languages, right? So you take education in English, but that results in deprivation and depletion of your other language abilities in Gujarati, Bangla, Tamil, Malayalam. This subtractive bilingualism is a model that education system for 70 years has been continuing, right? So in order to bring forth a kind of positive, productive encounter with English, we, or what is known as additive bilingualism, we have introduced this paper called Comparative Indian Literature. That is the rationale why we are doing it. Another strange phenomena that I mentioned earlier was that we are the only country in the world that studies our literatures in English language, our own literatures in former colonizers' language. What does that tell us about ourselves? Japanese, तो Japanese literature Japanese में सीखेगा, हम Indian literature English में पढ़ते हैं. So what does it tell us about ourselves? What kind of people are we? Yes, responses.
To put it delicately, we can say that we are a bit of a pushover. But to state, so to quote my father, we are idiots.
We are
idiots. My father says that hum pagal hai, that we are letting it happen to us.
And the price that we are paying for subtractive bilingualism is that maybe one fine day in coming 70 years, right? These languages will cease to exist in our lives. And there would be no Gujarati, no Punjabi, no Bangla, no Malayalam, no Hindi, no Marathi, and no Gujarati. So such a situation, how will you look at such situation? Is it a situation that is something that we should look forward to, or do something about it? What do you think? What kind of situation would that be?
Sir, I think it's very ironical that being literature students, we are discussing this about like how English has become a kind of status. Like I was thinking about it yesterday that we being literature students have to study English, and we have chosen the subject to study English. But I don't know, maybe we should just stop paying too much attention to it, or maybe we should not let it affect ourselves too much. For not being, fluent in it, or to not being too good at speaking in English.
Okay. What are other people's views about this? Khadija says that probably we should not be giving too much importance, if I understood you properly, to English, to make it a kind of great status symbol and sign of intellectual superiority, cultural superiority.
Yes, sir, exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
But at the same time, English has its advantages because it's modern language of knowledge, right? And it's also the language of connectivity, link language. And it's also the language that is required in globalized world where you have to communicate across cultures, right? So requirement of English is one thing, but considering it as a symbol of superiority, superior intelligence, superior culture, or even morality, is something that we should be wary of, right? So how many of you agree with Khadija? Raise your hands. Okay. 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 Right. So at this juncture, what can we do then? If you believe that English should not be put on a pedestal, it should be treated as a requirement, a need, rather than thought. Right? Today, English is considered as
Sir, I think we can treat English as other countries do, using this, like learning this language from like additive bilingualism perspective.
Exactly.
We push our language, and so our language should be like stronger than ever, so that we can learn English, so that it complements it, learning
Right.
English.
Right, very true. The relation of complementarity rather than exclusion and deprivation should be the model, right? And that's what I have been personally trying to do from past 25 years as a student, as a teacher, as a researcher, as a writer. It was in my post-graduation that I started writing in Marathi, which was my first language, though I didn't study it formally. I wrote poetry in English and Hindi, right? And then moved over to Marathi and explored that even if I don't have education, formal education in Marathi, I could express myself, liberate myself in Marathi. Marathi was more liberating for me personally. So I wrote extensively in Marathi. For my doctoral research, I selected Narsi Mehta, and I wonder how many of you know who Narsi Mehta is. Does anyone know who is Narsi Mehta?
Yes, sir. Gujarat's Adi Kavi.
Right. He is considered to be Adi Kavi of Gujarat. Right. Though he is not the first poet of Gujarat, he is considered as Adi Kavi. And what else about Narsi Mehta?
Sir, he wrote Vaishnava Janto.
Correct. Right.
And
Absolutely right.
he was also I mean, although he was from Nagar Brahmin, an upper caste, he was, I believe he was cast away. I mean, he was
Yes.
excluded from his own members of the community.
Right. Why? And today Nagar Brahmins are proud of Narsi Mehta, though they outcasted him when he was alive. Right. So
Sir,
why these?
I don't remember I don't remember the reason.
He was outcasted because he went and sang and celebrated with people who are called untouchables, right? Or sweepers who are considered as untouchables. So he used to go to these communities and sing praises of God. And that's why his people of his caste outcasted him. Very good. Yeah, Madhu, you have to say something, add something.
No, sir, but I'd like to say, like you said, that writing in Marathi gives you that feeling of liberation. I feel like our language is, after all, our language. And even if we want to write a simple love letter, and if you write it in English, somehow you don't get that sense of intimacy that you can get in your own language.
So
So
you
we
have
can
tried,
just
doing that based on your experiences.
no, all I'm saying is we can look at English as having its uses instead of looking at it as a prestige marker.
Right, as a marker of superiority, right? It like as if you're owning BMW लेने से आप इस समाज में प्रतिष्ठा बढ़ जाती है, इसलिए ये अंग्रेजी से भी बढ़ जाती है. So you should stop considering English as language of knowledge and as a utilitarian one, right? Connecting is what I do personally. And I read a lot of Marathi and I read Narsi Mehta extensively. I translated his compositions into English for my PhD research. So that is available online. So I translated around 90 padas of Narsi Mehta. And I found that Narsi Mehta is everywhere around me. He is part of the uh, uh, culture that I actually inhabit. So when I used to travel or commute in trains, I could hear his bhajans being sung, or in Navratri, I could hear many of his compositions being sung. So it's part of living culture. It's not something that has died. So in some way, I was connecting to the living culture and who I am through my research. So research became a way to connect with who I am, discover myself in many ways. Yeah, Cecil, you want to say something?
Yes, sir. Like it's out of the context question, but as you said that the research made you do certain things. So I remember in our bachelor's, while you were teaching us criticism, you quoted some examples or something from Hindi literature. Like I got that you had fair enough, more than enough knowledge about Hindi literature, which I don't have. But it's just my curiosity that is this thing because of the translations you do, or is it because the research thing you are into, like you are so much into Hindi literature as well? So it's just my curiosity. I wanted to know it since long.
Because Hindi is also a language of our everyday existence, right? So, and I had Hindi in my 12th standard, and I love Hindi literature, right? So I love Gujarati, Hindi, and Marathi literature, and I love English literature as well. I love American literature, Latin America. So basically, I love literature in any languages. However, I find that people are ashamed or feel that there is nothing worth studying in Hindi or Gujarati or Marathi or Bangla. So that is something that is extremely detrimental. And that is how I turned to the subject that I'm teaching. So the paper that I'm teaching is the paper that I have been researching from past 25 years. I finished my PhD in 2002. And translation became my central research project. And I translated from Gujarati literature into English, and I translated a lot of Marathi literature into English. And I loved reading Hindi. And so these 3 or 4 languages are the languages I have been working with from past 25 years. So, which is not to say that English literature is bad or wrong, or it is considered to be baggage of sin, right? I only mean that you won't find people in England studying Gujarati literature, right? You would find 5 people studying Gujarati literature, but there are 250 applications for studying English only in Baroda, right? So this imbalance is what I'm trying to rectify. If you go on internet and search for Shakespeare, you will find lakhs of sites. But if you go on internet to look up for who Bhartendu Harishchandra was, or Narsi Mehta was, or Premchand was, then you will have to find less information online compared to Shakespeare or Milton. So this is the imbalance that I'm seeking to rectify. And so the languages that I am born and brought up in are the fields which are largely underexplored, right? So it's not out of some nationalist flag bearing that I will glorify Marathi or Gujarati or Punjabi literatures, but it's more of being an insider and being exploring something that is underexplored. There is a research gap, as they said. I think I discussed research gaps last year when I was talking about literature review, right? Do you remember that? Does anyone remember last year's conversation I had with you?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So there is a huge research gaps in Indian literature. So I studied that. It's not because I want to pose myself as a great nationalist, which I am not, right? There is a difference between patriotism and nationalism. Patriotism is in some way love, affection, and bonding that you have with the society in which, or institutions that you work in. And nationalism is more about loving kind of discourses about nation, rather than actually connecting to people. And patriotism was an older mode of loyalty to the region in which you are born and brought up. Nation is a modern category, something that we'll discuss later on, but it's kind of attachment to these languages and literature, and my personal belief that Gujarati Hindi and Marathi are in no way inferior literary languages compared to English. It is this fundamental assumption that they are as good as, in their own way, with English and American literatures that I work with. I don't want to claim that they are greater than, but they are definitely as rich and as exciting as English. That's my own place from where I work. Yeah, Khadija, Rushi, bolo.
Yes, sir. As you said that Hindi is not inferior, and even though I said that we should not give much importance to English, but I realize that whenever I have to write something in Hindi, I have like started to forget the matras and everything in Hindi because I studied it last when I was in 10th, and after that, English ही है जो है. So I have like I realized that matra और वो सब भूल गई हूँ. So I really feel sad about it that it was like it is my first language, and still I'm not as good as writing in Hindi as I am in English. Although I'm good at speaking in it, but I cannot write it well. So I don't know what this kind of like what should I
And
do
that is
about
what
it?
I mean by additive or subtractive bilingualism, right? You acquired English, and that's a very good thing. You should learn any language in the world, right? You should not be against learning any language in the world. English क्या
Yes,
चीज है कोई भी भाषा आपसे, but not at the cost of something that which you already have. That's my position.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. So I don't know how many will agree with this, but this is something that I realize every other day whenever I have to write something in Hindi.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
That is what I mean, right? By subtractive bilingualism, which has become the value structure that informs education system as well, right? Okay. So what is comparative literature and why do we study it? Is something that we'll explore at length. We'll do it to death in your core paper, which I'm going to engage, right? So you are part of, you will have to study paper 11, which is comparative literature and translation studies from an international context, as an international discipline, right? How did it emerge, what it is, and why do we do it? Comparative Indian literature comes from an Indian context, and it differs significantly from European models of comparative literature in several ways. And why do we do it, and what do we mean by comparative literature is where I will repeat it again in 11, but I'm saying it just now. To understand what comparative literature is, it is good idea to understand what it is not, right? And like all terms, it can be extremely misleading and create a lot of hang-ups. For example, the term criticism as we use it in our everyday conversation means that you are finding faults, and it is something negative. And that is one of the reasons why many people resist criticism. They don't like the idea of criticism. मुझे criticize मत करो. वो negativity से जुड़ा हुआ है. But criticism as an academic exercise in English studies is more about asking questions, right? And discovering knowledge or forwarding knowledge, producing knowledge. So criticism in academic setup implies, literary criticism implies producing knowledge, right? It's a productive, positive term, as unlike criticism as you use it in your everyday life. Similarly, comparative literature can also create a lot of problems because the term comparison very often implies negativity, right? Why should somebody, why do my parents compare me with my siblings? I don't like it, right? So that comparison for value judgments and running someone down or trying to show that somebody is better than others is precisely what we don't do in comparative literature. So this is one thing which comparative literature is not. It's not like comparing you with your siblings or a particular friend with another friend, or your X with Y, Y as a current. So it's not comparison in that sense. Comparison is a mode of perception that is necessary for any knowledge to exist. Knowledge cannot come about without comparison. So it's a larger mode of knowledge production. So if I want to find out chemical composition of atmosphere on Mars, then for me the frame of reference would be chemical composition of atmosphere on Earth, and then I will be able to say, हाँ, यहाँ पे भी वो है या यहाँ पे नहीं है. In order to find out what makes chemical composition of atmosphere of Mars distinctive, I have already implied comparison. Right? So comparison is already always made when you try to get any knowledge. So comparison in itself is nothing unique to this subject we are studying. It is part of everyday life. You already always compare. When you say this film is hatke, then you have already made a comparison with non-hatke films. Yes, no? Nah, maybe.
Yes, sir.
So when you say you are unique and you should not be compared to anyone else, your siblings, you have already made a comparison. How did you discover you are unique and different? Am I making some sense when I say this? That in order to claim that I am different from my sibling, you have already compared, and that's how you discovered difference. है ना? Difference कैसे मिला आपको? Through comparison. Are you with me in the conversation?
Yes.
Right. So comparison, as we use it, is something that is far more fundamental to understanding and knowledge. But then what is comparative literature becomes a problem. And like Gujarati literature, Marathi literature, Bangla literature, English literature, French literature, German literature, Tamil literature, this is comparative literature is not a body of literature, right? It is not a set of texts that you study. And that is another reason why people find it difficult to understand what is comparative literature, right? The first problem comes from comparison being understood negatively. Second comes from comparison as being ubiquitous activity. And the third obstacle is that comparative literature is not literature like American literature. American literature is literature, novels, poems, plays produced by Americans. Tamil literature is novels, poems, plays produced by Tamilians in Tamil language. Comparative literature is not a literature like that. It's not a it is not an archive of literary texts, right? But it implies certain methodology of studies, right? So now that you are aware of what it is not, I will tell you what it is, right? And I will stop immediately after this. What is it? And this conversation I will repeat in paper 11. What it is you explore relationships, historical relationships across languages and cultures. It is a cross-cultural, cross-lingual way of studying something, which means that I study Shakespeare not as an English author only. I study English Shakespeare as somebody who has borrowed many things from Greek drama and Latin drama of Seneca. He's influenced by Seneca and Greek drama as well, right? He is also taking on the Desi or vernacular drama of his times, like morality play or miracle plays and all that. And he is producing text for his own audience, right? He is taking a genre called sonnet, an Italian form, and anglicizing it and producing what is known as English sonnet, right? So studying Shakespeare and his historical linkages with Greek, Latin, and uh, Italian is called comparative literature. It is a different way of approaching texts, right? Which involves cross-cultural and cross-linguistic perspective. So comparative literature is actually a perspective, right? Which is historical, cross-lingual, cross-cultural. So when I study Wordsworth, I try to understand his indebtedness to Rousseau and French Revolution. I try to understand his friendship with Coleridge, who was a great German scholar who understood Kant and Hegel, and how is Coleridge indebted to Kant. So I read Coleridge not just as an English critic and poet, but as a European thinker, right? So what I have changed here is that I am out of English perspective only. I have taken multinational, multicultural perspective on Coleridge. Does it make any sense to you? So what is comparative literature? It's a different approach. It is not a body of text. It is not about judging somebody as good or bad, but understanding historical relations of all kinds in study of literature, right? And these relations historically cut across languages and culture. What do you make of it? From the conversation that I said, what is comparative literature? And why it is difficult to understand is because it is not like American literature or Tamil or Gujarati literature. It involves an approach, methodology, and perspective. नजरिया, कंपैरेटिव लिटरेचर ये कोई चीज नहीं है पर नजरिया है, which is historical, cross cultural and cross lingual. So when I study restoration drama, मैं सब इंग्लिश लिटरेचर के एग्जांपल्स दे रहा हूं, तो मैं ये देखता हूं कि फ्रांस के साथ इंग्लैंड के क्या ताल्लुकात थे. That how did Charles II, who ran away to France, came back after Restoration, brought French sensibility and love for French literature in a massive way to England, and produced kind of French models of drama, right? So I'm exploring relation between English and French. I'm not studying Wycherley or Sheridan and all Restoration playwrights, Dryden as English playwrights only, but also as European playwrights. So what do you understand about comparative literature? How many of you could grasp what I'm trying to say, and how many of you have some difficulty? Who has difficulty in understanding what I have said? It's perfectly all right to say that you have difficulty, because it's a difficult idea to grasp. It's a concept. It's a perspective. It's abstract. It's a methodological perspective. Yes, your responses. What do you understand? So if somebody asks you comparative, what is comparative literature? So Komal, what will be your reply?
Okay, so I guess when it comes to comparative literature and what I've realized now, it would be to not just like like from the starting, like from BA we start looking at text, and then we have to know certain bits about like the author and everything, and so there is a process to understanding the text.
So, but when it comes to comparative literature, the task is gonna increase a bit more here, because now we have to understand the things that are borrowed from other cultures that are
Right.
put here. So,
Right.
and actually, when it comes to like certain authors, like James Joyce or someone else, so it's quite easy to like, it's quite easy to take this approach from where the person has borrowed and everything. But like, the Shakespeare example actually made me think a lot, because whenever I think about Shakespeare, and like I never thought much about how many things he has borrowed from Greek drama, because at the end these tragedies and Greek drama, as you said, Aristotle, we are studying in English. So you sort of start thinking that all of this is coming from, like, the like Europe, like, and not from the other lands. So
Exactly. So you're looking for things which are from other places, which Shakespeare has assimilated and made his own, like sonnet, say for example. Petrarch wrote sonnet, and there were poets called Wyatt and Earl of Surrey, Thomas Wyatt and Earl of Surrey, who anglicized sonnet and made it into different kind of rhyme scheme that they made, which Shakespeare followed. And Milton tried to go back to Petrarchan form, right? So you have Petrarchan sonnet and English sonnet. Now, all this is part of literary history that you have studied, right? So what changes when you take a comparative perspective is that you realize that Shakespeare को भले ही हम genius कहें, who produces something out of nothing, places where he has taken things from and transformed them for his own purposes, right? So you're looking at the various places from things are borrowed, assimilated, transformed. Like restoration comedy, like Milton's epic. इंग्लिश में तो कोई एपिक था ही नहीं, मिल्टन ने क्लासिकल एपिक को एंग्लिसाइज किया. What do you make of it? There was no such thing like epic in English. Milton took Virgil and Homer and whatnot, classical genres, and produced an English epic modeled after classical genres. The only difference is the classical epics are not Christian, but Milton's poetry is through and through Christian, right? At the same time, he is a different kind of Christian from the other Christians, because he belongs to different denomination called Puritans. So I am looking at English literature from a comparative perspective. Does that make sense? You can also study American literature from a comparative perspective. In same way, in this paper, we are going to take a comparative perspective for studying Indian literature, right?
So, so when you said ki, like, how can we move the English language from the pedestal? So comparative literature is a way in which we can actually move the English from the pedestal, because we see ki how English is not actually a superior culture or language, because even the authors and poets from this culture or this country actually take inspiration and are influenced by different cultures, different regions, places, languages.
Very good. And those who did their BA criticism with me, I pointed out how Habib calls his book History of Literary Criticism.
Yes.
And what he is doing is Western literary criticism, right? So Western becomes universal. So comparative is one way by challenging this universalistic outlook to literature, which Eurocentrism promotes. And the best example is Macaulay, who says, "एक कबाट हमारा अंग्रेजों का या यूरोपियन का पूरे ईस्ट के सब कबर्ड्स के बराबर है या सुपीरियर है." right? That kind of colonial arrogance, which and ignorance, right, is something that we are trying to rectify through comparative literature. Very good observation. You are displacing the Western paradigm when you put it in comparative perspective. Very good. Very important observation. Yeah.
Ignorance also plays a very important role in this, because if I see myself, I guess not just 2 years before, there was this one friend of mine who asked me, "Can you suggest me some Indian authors?" He was from Europe, and I was like, I did not actually have a good answer because I myself, being an Indian, did not know much Indian authors who are very good. So that is a part of me who was ignorant of Indian literature, parts of regional literature. So I think that is very important.
Macaulay के लिए तो understandable है, वो बॉस है कंपनी का, right? वो दादागिरी कर सकता है, मगर नौकर भी जब ignorant हो जाए अपने बारे में, तब प्रॉब्लम शुरू होता है ना? क्या मैकॉले को पता नहीं था क्या है ईस्टर्न कबर्ड्स में, हम लोगों को पता होना चाहिए.
So, sir, comparative Indian literature would be a conscious move from us towards our regional literatures. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Very good. Anyone else has to say something before I stop? Tomorrow I'll talk about what is Indian comparative Indian literature. Indian literature का discussion हम कल करेंगे, right?
Okay, sir.
So we have talked about why we are studying it, how we are going to do it. Now we come to what we are going to do, and that we'll discuss tomorrow, right? And if you have anything to say, disagree, please feel free to disagree, because this is not Macaulay's company that I am running, right? And secondly, you may have a different perspective, which may actually help me to look at what I have not understood. So I welcome criticism and different.
Yeah. I was just thinking about the colonized intellectual, like how they escaping from their own literature and to going towards English literature, and once they find alienated in itself, and they come back to their own literature and gaining the national like a consciousness. And I was just remembering that from cultural studies.
Very good.
Yeah, it was what Falcon says, I
We
guess.
are following a similar trajectory, though I will point out why it is slightly different tomorrow. But and this is what you are supposed to do. Very good, VP. Right? Is that you have to make connections across your syllabus. यहाँ के पेपर का रिलेशन दूसरे पेपर के साथ भी है, is what you have to explore, right? Because knowledge is one, but we have distributed it for sake of convenience. So it may, whatever we discuss here may also have bearing on other papers, and what you study elsewhere also has bearing on this paper. Very good. Very good.
I think that's the effect of the colonization upon, on us. Like we try to I'm sorry, I'm not describing very well, but we are like trying to close to them, and just that's the effect of the colonization on us.
So we are trying to reverse the bad effects of colonialism, right? Because it's our responsibility. And take whatever is good from the West. We should always be open to the West. And I remember Gandhi's statement here. He said that I will keep all the windows of my home house open, but I refuse to be swept off the feet by any. Right? That is what Gandhi says. I will keep all the windows of my house open, but I will not be swept off the feet by any of those winds. Sounds interesting, yes?
Yes, sir, very well.
Yes. So that is my perspective. I won't be swept off the wind, but I will keep all the windows open. I'm not going to close the winds and go into some superstitious rant about past glories, right? Okay, so we stop here for today because I have another meeting to attend.